Hi everyone, welcome to a Wolfram language design discussion. We are going to talk about a knotty topic, which is what is a variable? And let's start filling out some of what I think we should be talking about. Okay, so this is the result in part of people saying, "Hey, I want to." There's several different things. How can a variable be named? I might want to make this bigger. How can a variable be named? Um, uh, do variables have values, etc.
I don't understand what those questions are.
Okay. Well, let me give some examples here. So, actually, let me just make roles of variables. Okay. One role is a handle to an expression. For example, in module.
Right. That is the category that I have as something that can have an own value.
Okay.
Right. And
Um,
if you opened up those sections, you'll see that, I actually
already
uh
figured this out.
uh,
Good. Okay. All right. So another one is, in a sense, what you are thinking of. There's an algebraic variable that never has an own value. I think there's for things like axiomatic theory, we have, um, we have some ugliness here because we're using these formal variables because we want things which can never have values, because
yep.
they are, in a sense, intermediate between these handle type things and things like, for algebraic variables, we can imagine in many cases that we actually do want them to have a value. I mean, if we say solve, x squared equals y for x, we might very well want to say, y is 7 and what's x?
Right. And certainly, I mean, I think a more common example is with dsolve, where you might actually assign that solution to a variable that you then use as a function in further computation.
Or alternatively, even just saying plot
Yep,
something where you're effectively temporarily assigning values. But you never want to do that here.
correct.
Those are pure sort of formal variables. I mean, we've had endless conversations about formal variables, and that's what led us to these dotted forms. And we have, we've done that as a kind of morphological, this is a morphological conveyance of meaning, not a syntactic one, even, in the sense that we're changing the actual symbolism to do this. Okay, let's talk about problems. Okay. Here's the problem. People want to use E as a variable. What are some, okay, let's list problematic variables. Problems. One is, collisions between common variable names and built-in meanings.
Yep.
That's what's
So
that?
that, yes, right. So that'll be EIN,
Yeah,
possibly pi.
much less likely pi. Um, but you don't really know. I mean, even C has a built-in meaning for us. I mean, which ones actually? If I just do this, let's say two uppercase. This is something I should know, but I don't. Two uppercase of alphabet, and let's now say two expression of that. Oh, look at that. That's exotic. And now let's say, how should I do this? This is going to blow my system up, isn't it? If I say, uh,
Well, did you want
You
to
you might
do
just map
what
context across.
right?
Sorry.
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest. Map context across those symbols. Right. So C, D, E, right?
Well, let's just say select percent select in this.
Yep.
What's going on with I?
It
Yeah, I don't know.
evaluated to complex 0, 1. So it's not a symbol, so it
Ah,
doesn't have a context.
makes sense.
Oh yeah, I didn't think of those. Well, D we forgot here.
Right. Because we were thinking of things with, well,
Okay,
yeah.
so we've got a bunch of. I mean, I'm just curious here.
Right. Now
We do.
C and K don't have, up,
Are they
they
protected or not?
I believe C is protected and K is not, but I wouldn't swear to that off the top of my head.
Okay, so none of
Yeah.
those.
I don't know about K, but I was going to say that C is because alpha has to work around that.
Ah, the okay. So that's one problem is people wanting to use those letters as names of things.
Right. For which, in my opinion, and well, certainly my solution, which I feel is pretty good, is right. You use an E in one of the other E's, right? You use you know script E is probably
All
what I
right.
use more common, or
Let's imagine that we had an auto. I mean, just in terms of the use another E idea.
yep.
Okay. That will be helped if when you typed E, you got an autocomplete here that gave you the fighting chance to use another E. Not clear what E we'd want to recommend, but that will be a place where we could insert other E-ness, so to speak.
Wait, how do you know if it's a? I mean, is it just when someone says E equals? I mean, otherwise they might mean E.
Yeah. So
Absolutely, but that means that we could still have an autocomplete that contains the ordinary E, paren the little this E. You see what I'm saying?
right. So basically, you want to break the rule that we need two letters before we show a completion menu. And presumably, the first completion should be just normal E. And then the second and maybe third completions are other E's.
Possibly.
And
Yeah,
then
but I mean,
maybe the top
even the
couple.
first the first E could be, what we could have in that menu could be E, and then something like, well, that's wrongly presented, but you know what I'm saying. That
Right.
E, and then some, formal E. I don't know. That may not be the right. Oops, formal capital E, whatever it is. I don't
Yep.
know whether that's the right thing that we want to recommend, but you know what I'm saying.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I mean, right. And so I think we should definitely include like script E or some such, just because that is functionally equivalent to a normal variable, right? It's not protected, it's in global,
yeah,
etc.
I agree. I agree. But I mean, I think my point is, I don't know if this is the right solution. And I think people will be unhappy if they can't have a formula where things look as if there's just an ordinary E there. And
But
perhaps we
I
need
think
something
I
in
think
traditional form. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, but I think people would be equally unhappy if they copy and pasted in something that looked like E, and then it didn't work. It did not have the value 2.7, etc.
Okay,
Um,
let me make another suggestion here that there is a form of E that is, for example, um, I'm not going to make it real, but something like this. I mean, that's not really what I'm suggesting, but some
Sure.
other
Yes, a
color
style.
or something.
Right. So we have a variable E character which is the same, which matches the E of the surrounding font, but is marked somehow as not being normal E.
Right. E variable or something like this.
Yes.
Now, that raises the question that instead of formal A and things, we could have something that's, A variable, bad name, but you know what I'm saying. Which is stylistically, where, because we didn't consider that for some reason, where we were doing the things with dots and so on. Why didn't we consider that? Having it simply stylistically different. Because we've increasingly
Well, I think part of it is that part of it is that that is sort of a really, if we're going to have a whole family, right? The formal ones are system and protected, right? They're really quite different. And so having it look different is I think a good thing. Also, I'm sure, we've gotten sort of less careful about ambiguous input, but we wanted things to be unambiguous.
well, but I mean, if I say, what the heck? Great. Well, this is a broken version, but that's
what are you
I'm
trying?
typing
Is that
control equals, and it's just
okay?
totally broken.
Yeah.
This is
Is that a
probably today's.
prototype? Ooh, and 14.0. That or is
No.
current?
That's the kernel version.
Yeah.
That's
So
my
it may
kernel version.
it may be some sort of mismatch between your kernel version and the front end, which is still a bug in my opinion, but
Yeah,
not
it's still
quite
a
as
bug,
horrible.
but we should note that. Okay. In any case, what am I saying here? So what I was trying to say was, you know what? I'm gonna get rid of this for a second. Okay, let's try this again. What the heck? That's so weird. Let me try a different window. Oh my gosh, this is totally weird. Ah, sigh. Okay, well, anyway, let's see what happens if I. Okay, whatever. I don't understand why this is happening, but you know what I'm going for. I'm making a quantity, which is now displayed differently, right?
Right. If you're now using a 14.1, right? Well, yeah, you could just type it in, right? I was going to say if you're actually using a 14.1 kernel now, you could also use equal bracket.
Indeed. I'm just curious to try it. Okay, that worked nicely. Good. We've got an break equal, control equals. But anyway, this is another case where this is something different, right?
Right.
And now we've got this metaphor of equals whatever. And it's an interesting question whether, for example, if we do that, actually, okay, so escape is an alpha.
Yep.
What is escape? Escape dot A, escape.
That's formal A.
I didn't know that worked. I'm sure I invented that, but I didn't know that worked.
And I'm pretty sure you insisted on it.
Well, it sounds sensible to me.
It used to, in fact, that you can put the dot either before or after because it used to be one way, I think, at the end. At least I think it did. Oh, no, it used to be dollar, and then you insisted that we add the dot form.
Okay.
Yeah, the
well,
docs
anyway.
mentioned dollar.
In addition to mentioning dot, I hope.
Yes.
They do mention dot, yeah. Okay. Okay, let me mention another thing. Okay. So this the other thing is the famous variables like x sub 1 or worse x sub I. Okay, we almost put this in to version 3, but we backed it out at the last minute because we thought it was semantically troubled.
Well, it's also extra semantically troubled because of things like indexed now.
Well, what happens if we just say symbol of this? Huh. Okay. I mean, I think what we had in mind was, could one package this up into
Right.
something?
Right. So there, right, with the notation package, right, there's like a symbolize thing you can do with the palette and probably also with the syntax, although I don't know the syntax well enough, right? And it sort of creates an equivalent symbol, and right, it sort of I think it interpretation boxes it, so it's backed by a symbol, but you have something that looks like X sub I.
Shall I load this?
Sure.
So is that what I do?
I believe it's notation backtick.
It should be a packlet in modern times.
Okay, I mean, there is a ref page if we really want to dig into this. It's been a while since I've played with it. So and Jason would be the real expert,
yeah, right.
as the maintainer. But right,
well,
but yeah.
I'm just curious if this but it's worth remembering that this does work, right? Although what it's done is something kind of bizarre, right? And if I say characters,
then you'll see a whole bunch of characters.
then it's a big, horrible mess.
Yes.
I wonder if that's right, by the way, the characters.
I think so. I mean, we've talked about adding a mode where it changes the interpretation, but I mean, that is absolutely, right. If you want to know, the byte count or the string length,
right.
right? That's absolutely what's there.
Right. Okay. So, but let's talk about X sub I and all these things. I mean, why do we not provide that as a blob, so to speak? Allow people to just say symbol of X sub I.
Well, for one thing, you don't say symbol of X, you say symbol of string X. Now, if you want to say...
Okay. No, okay, that's what I meant.
Well, I mean, right, if they think of the X and the I as two separate things that can be sort of independently pattern matched, right, they're just not going to get that, right?
Indeed.
Right. Like I imagine that the thing people want to do is they want to say X sub I, colon equals I squared or something like that.
Right. Which is a separate issue. And
but by the way, you keep writing these subscripts, write indexed of X comma I. Right. But full
what
form
happens
of that,
if
it's
I
not
say
just subscript.
colon equals I squared?
Well, I don't think you can because index is protected.
But what if X equals, what if X equals a list? Can you say indexed of X comma 2 equals something? Like part?
No, we didn't hook that up.
Well, first you need to make X a list, right? Like define X, but but it sounds like, yeah.
Right. So index of x comma 2 will now evaluate to b.
Right,
Which
but
is
if you say
kinda
equals
weird.
5, just try equals 5. It sounds like it probably won't work, but okay, fine. But it could have worked, and it might maybe work in the future or something.
What's the
Maybe.
difference then between indexed and part? Indexed is a symbolic thing.
It doesn't
Right.
complain if it doesn't work, basically.
Right. And so, well, for one thing, I don't think it takes, all 1,700 different syntaxes that part supports. But yes, it's intended, for symbolic computations, right? So you can, right, if you have some sort of vector equation and you want to write it as a bunch of scalars, right, then you have indexed of, y comma 1 and y comma 2. Or like especially in region functions, you'll see this pop out a lot, that it gives results in terms of indexed because you have a variable that's a vector variable.
Can you give me an example? So if I make a region,
so do what's a good example? Right, you want a function where it's where you say something like xy is x is in disk bracket.
right, okay. Well, I mean, so if I say random point, no, what do I want to say?
You want to like do an integral over a region.
Right. So yeah. So one example where you type this in, right, is you do integrate of indexed of x comma 1 plus indexed of x comma 2, and then you say,
Right, I could just say indexed of x comma 1, x is an element
of circle bracket, or that.
Right. Yeah, by the way, this is used a lot also in like all the convex optimization functions and stuff.
I was not familiar with that, but that's nice.
Right, because
okay.
it's nice and symmetrical. So once you full simplify it, right, if you move that regular pentagon off of being centered on the origin, right, you'd get a non-zero answer there, obviously.
Sure. And I'm sure if I did this, oh no, maybe that's obvious. Doesn't have symmetry in that direction. Who knows? Oh, that's at the centroid. Yeah. Okay. So where are we going with these things? So you're saying x sub I to be a variable. What?
A possible solution would be to remove the protected attribute, like we do with derivative, for the same reason.
Well, for indexed.
Yeah, for indexed.
And subscript, right? Subscript is not protected precisely so that people can write things like, x sub 1 equals 7.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, though, if indexed were not protected, I can see so many weird things like what we just did, where you say, indexed of, you have x as a list, and you say indexed of x comma 2 equals this. And then whenever you access it with indexed, it works fine. But when you look at x on its own, it's not fine.
Oh gosh, how do I even back out of this?
You unset it, right? So equals dot.
Yeah. But I mean, for example, if that had an up value, that if some kind of weird up value where that associated that value with x, that would probably help things, maybe.
That's what I was gonna say. I don't know if up value is the right way to do it, but that's what I was gonna say about the inconsistency with part, is you can assign to part. And so I might expect assigning to indexed to be reflected back in the original. I
Right,
guess
but
that's more
part doesn't allow
difficult though,
symbolic.
because if the as long as it's indexed of X where X is a list as opposed to indexed of a list. Yeah. Anyway.
I mean, exotically, I could do this. I could say indexed of 55, comma I. Ooh, that's interesting.
Right. Because it can tell that that's clearly an atomic thing.
Okay. Okay.
Right. So I mean, let's just do the experiment. I mean, I'm sure this will work, but do x by caret equals 7. God,
I use that syntax so rarely.
Yeah. Right. And so now question mark. Yeah. And now if we clear X, then we'll clear that. I mean, of course, the problem is that if we did that, then
oops, what's going on here?
Did it also
It's an
give
value
an
of
up
I.
value for I?
Yeah.
we should have used tag set. Okay.
Right.
Right. So there's a question of which of the two arguments do we associate it with, and what happens if the first argument, if both arguments are sort of complicated things.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine that the default okay, now we say clear X. Okay, fine. Okay, but is this everything that we are dealing with? So there is the notion it is useful to have formalized variables that can never be assigned a value, where you just don't have to worry. Yeah, I mean the real issue is
Right.
okay.
So right. I mean, I personally don't feel like we need a full alphabet of these variables that are characters that are just like normal variables. I mean, we wanted a complete set of formal variables because, right, we needed a complete set. They're special, they're protected, you can't assign to them, etc. If we're going to have things that are just like ordinary variables, I feel like we should really only set those up for the things that have conflicts.
Okay, but look, this is the main issue. You are generating a thing. You're generating a thing. Let's say axiomatic theory. Okay. The last thing you want is that axiomatic theory, which needs to use variables to describe itself, or for that matter, a sum or an integral or a parametric curve, or let's just see an example of that. Let's say I say, oh, for goodness sake.
Would you mind putting the cell expression for that in the chat just so I can take a look and see if there's something obvious?
Okay. Anyway, so what's a I don't know, cycloid parametric equation? Okay, so that's another case where in principle they didn't need to be formal variables. By the way, I consider it a bug that those spaces don't look right there. And perhaps that could be passed on, please.
Yeah.
Which spaces? I'm sorry.
The ones here, they look small. They look like they're thin space multiplication spaces.
Okay.
Okay, but the main point is, the main use case here for formal variables is you're putting something out where you profoundly never want its things to have values. but you don't know, you're just plopping it out there. You don't know whether somebody already assigned values to A and B.
Yep.
And it's kind of, another strategy. What other, but then it's super annoying. Like I'm annoyed every single time when I have to, I didn't know about this escape, but which is embarrassing. But I'm annoyed every time I have to kind of type one of these formal variables. So for example, if I type A,
I mean, ideally, you don't have to type them very often, right? Like when do you normally have to type these?
okay, a very common case
It used to
is
be
if
my
I said,
full-time job to type these.
what's that?
You
It used
said
to be
it.
my full-time job to type these and the
Why?
for alpha entity property tables.
Right. Yes. Well, when we were working on what was it, axiomatic knot theory or
I was
curves?
doing topology. Before that, alpha also had function spaces, topological spaces, continued fractions.
Continued fractions. That's the one I was thinking of. I was
What
like,
was the case for that?
right. We had a project to
No,
sort
I
of.
know I know what we did, but what was the case where you had formal variables?
It was
Well,
some of the properties.
right. The statement of every theorem, or if you had properties that, were curves, or functions, right? Then we
Right.
would express them in functions of
All right.
formal
So
variables.
we've got two ways to do this. Okay. Actually, it's sort of interesting. Okay. So another approach would be localizing variables, localizing names. Okay. So one approach that we have is, module, where you name the things you want to localize, A, B, C, blah, blah, blah.
Right. Now, I mean, if what you're returning are actually functions, right, then you don't need to use formal variables, right? Because
Indeed, because they're already localized, because they've been named as, localizing names. We can say, specify what names we want to localize. That's one strategy. So strategy two, which we adopt more rarely, is localize names by cell, e.g. with cell context.
right. I mean,
And
that's typically more often cell group, but yes.
right. But I mean, so another possibility, which might be crazy, strategy three. This is probably crazy, but I'm just going to say it anyway. See, I mean, we've got WFR things that will make formalized versions. Don't we have a WFR that does this?
I'm not familiar with that, but Ian, Christopher, are you familiar with such a? Bob was supposed to be here. Maybe he's out. He would know.
I don't know WFR. I know the Alpha code base has utilities for that.
There is one. Formalized symbols. Interesting. And there's an unformalized as well. I mean,
and oh, okay. So it didn't formalize the plus, which I guess is good.
yeah. Well, let's see what happens if we say something like this plus n. Oh. What happens if we do plus j?
Right. So I'm guessing, so type in an explicit global backtick n and see if that makes a difference to the symbol. I wonder, to the resource function. I wonder if it's checking by context. Yep.
Okay.
Which for formalize is, given the functionality of n, it's a little bit silly for formalize. But if that were a D, it's not at all obvious that you would want to turn a capital D into a formal capital D.
Yeah. Well, except D is rarely an output. Capital C, different story.
Right. Or capital O.
Indeed. Okay, but this is another strategy that essentially is, I mean, this might be something worth putting into the system because, okay, if formalized, what kind of evaluation is it doing? I mean, in other words, if it was a lexical thing, you could say formalize of blah, blah, blah. No, I don't know. That doesn't make a lot of sense because you might want something which dynamically returns something and then you formalize the results.
Yeah. Well, yeah, let's just, do a +1 in one of those. Is there any holding or,
I don't think so, but let's try
yeah.
it. Nope.
Yeah.
What does it do with the multi-symbol variable name? Every one of them gets formalized?
Nothing.
Nothing.
All right. Again, let's review. Okay. Where do we want to use this? We want to use this in places where we are generating a variable that the most common cases, we're generating a variable where we want to be sure that it does not have a value, but we also would like it to be a variable that is readily typable. Now, here's the thing I could imagine. Let's say you have a formal A. Yeah, you know what we should be doing? Yeah, this is stupid. We should have done this long ago. Okay, assume you have a session that has a formal A in it. As soon as you type A, you should get an autocomplete that allows you to type the formal A. We shouldn't volunteer that when there hasn't been a formal A. You see what I'm saying?
Well, first question is what's a session and how would the
Well, we do that right now. We do it right now. The autocompletes are affected by what you have typed previously in the session.
Sort of very, very mildly.
But they are affected by it. If you have an obscure function, and like when I've defined, look, even very directly.
Right. So no, it's not affected by what you've typed in the session. It's affected by what completions you choose.
No, there it is. AZA is now
Well,
completion.
yes. So because that you've created a new symbol in the global in the current context, right? When you use a formal A, you've not created a new symbol. Those are created at kernel launch time in C code, no less, right?
Yeah.
And so the front end has no signal that you have typed in an A dot or that it's been used in some way, because that symbol has always existed.
Okay, but I think it could have such a signal. It's not a kernel signal. I mean, look, in the I'm a little surprised. Is this 14.1? Yeah, why isn't this lighting up with similar named symbol? Why wasn't that symbol? I thought that lit up in code.
I have honestly no idea what you're talking about.
Um uh
It's only per cell, right?
Oh, yes. If you click in something, it will show multiple. And you're talking about semantic highlighting, right? So
Yes.
yes. So now create an input cell. That's only per cell. So if you have an input cell with 2 formal A's in it, or whatever's, and then you put the cursor next to
Yeah,
one
we
of
can
them.
see that right now.
Yep.
The A's are lighting up.
Yep. It's a little hard to see through the Zoom, but I do see it.
Yeah, right. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So look, this thing, which we don't have John or anybody else here to speak to this. I think John is at a Scrabble tournament.
Oh, I think he did mention being out.
As he does.
Yes.
We'll see if he's the world champion this year. Anyway.
Yeah, he's out today, so he must be at the Scrabble tournament. Because I know it is about nowish.
Okay, fair enough. Okay. So
I think, I mean, certainly talking about you know, whether we can, yes, I mean, I think obviously that's a discussion we should have with John about the specifics about adding formal A to the completions at some time. I think the other thing that I would like to nail down is, do we want to add these variable characters, and how many of them should, how many do we have?
I don't know what we actually do. So, I mean, in other words, if we have, and also, yeah, and how do people know when they just, okay, so there are really 2 modes. One is there's already been a formal A in a session, okay? And the other is there hasn't. So similarly with an E, if there already has been a modified E in a session, then you can aggressively ask to autocomplete to that or substitute with that. If there hasn't been one, so what are we going to do? It's going to be like E variable or something?
Sure.
And it's going to have some different rendering. Like it's going to be a slightly different. Well, actually, that raises the question, okay? Which actually makes more sense. That maybe E, when you type it in, should actually turn a slightly different color. And that the E that you get as an E variable should look just like the other letters. That seems to make more sense to me because the E here, I think that's a much better idea.
Well, but that E is a different color than like F, right?
Exactly.
No,
yes, it is.
Well,
E is black. E is black because it's a system symbol, and F as an unknown thing is.
I understand, but when it appears in a, if I go EF like this, well, that's going to look completely different, right?
Right.
But let's say I say NF.
Yeah. Right, but we don't color things in output by, we don't color symbols differently in output.
Well, unless they're things like quantity symbols.
Well, that's not a symbol. Right. You have right. We're coloring the contents of the quantity in the quantity color, but what you see, right, is a number and a string, which is quantity colored.
We've painted ourselves into a corner here, okay? Mm-hmm. So the question is, what is the best way to get out of the corner? And to me, let's take this as a hypothesis, okay? That for those variables, for those symbols, wherever they were, up here, right? The controversial symbols, that every one of those in output is a slightly different color. In input and in output is a slightly different color, like a coding ligature.
I really, really hate that.
I was going to say the E and the I are already double struck.
Yeah, they're right. They're
The E and the I are solved for output. Okay.
yes.
The others are not. But so as soon as you see, so what I'm suggesting is you type in an E, okay, and it's a slightly different color, but there is an E underneath that is the E variable that is just black, or whatever it is, blue, whatever it is.
Well, until you assign to it, in which case it turns
becomes black. Right.
But
then look, in the autocomplete, we could perfectly well say E paren variable.
I think we would. Or I have no problem with with having the code assistants bring those up and having those descriptions. I just feel like suddenly coloring certain system symbols differently from all other system symbols is going to be very confusing.
Fair point. So
and certainly I would want, I would really appreciate John's input on
okay,
that.
let me make a different crazy suggestion.
Okay.
In the Department of Crazy Suggestions. Okay, let's imagine that E, as soon as you type a space, turns into the exponential E.
Right.
In other words, as a code ligature, now, I mean, the whole point of that would be you're going to get, if you're typing this in and you think you're typing energy equals blah, 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 it's going to look really weird and you're going to realize something went wrong. Right?
Yep.
I kind of like this idea. And if you backspace it across it, it'll just turn into a capital E again. I mean, we have the technology, as they've said.
Well, I mean, when you backspace, I mean, if you type, like hyphen greater, right? I mean, it stays ligatured.
This would work fine. If you type E equals, okay, and that ligatures to escape E, escape equals, and then you backspace the equals, there's no problem with that.
Right. So the other thing, I haven't tried this. Can you try typing a capital N?
Yep.
Just okay. Because I think N is the one that you created a version of in global earlier. And so if you have like, create global backtick sign.
You're going to completely destroy my session here.
Okay. You haven't used, sorry. Right. And so now when you start typing sign as input.
Where is the red? Yeah, I'm surprised, right? There should be like red coloring when you have conflicts on context path.
No, but there's no conflict because it was explicitly. Oh, you mean when he typed in that new cell? Yes. I agree.
Which one am I getting here?
That one.
Why didn't I get the global one?
Because context path has system first.
I don't.
Yep.
Is that true?
Yes.
Okay, but by the way,
right. But my point was is that we have a mechanism by which when you have by which the context is shown in parentheses next to the symbol.
Oh my goodness, John has just shown up. Are you not at a Scrabble tournament? Oh, okay. John, are you not at a Scrabble tournament?
Yeah, I registered and I'm in my hotel room.
Oh, okay.
Tournament begins tomorrow.
I see.
Okay. Well, we're talking about some somewhat interesting ideas in my view. Okay, this is a very basic one. If I've got a sign in a different context, surely that should be in the autocomplete. The sign with the other context.
No, that's not how we're doing contextual completion.
And just to be clear, they're both
as you type the context.
Right, but the point is that these are both on context path.
I think we should discuss this, but I think that's not for this meeting. I think we should discuss that in user assistance. So who's PMing here? Is it caller?
Yep.
Yeah, it's me.
Can you communicate that?
Yes.
Okay. Just to summarize for John, we've got two things we think we want so far. One is as soon as there's been an A dot, a formal A that's occurred in a session, that when you type A, just the single character A, that you should get an autocomplete that includes A dot. John is silent. Well, okay.
Sure.
So then if John is not
A dot for what character?
Right.
If I type in A, if there's been an A dot that appeared in the session.
And by A dot, he means formal A. Just to be clear.
If such a thing has appeared in the session, then when you type an A, I want to see an autocomplete that includes an A dot.
That includes a formal A.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, formal A.
Don't say A dot. It suggests you're typing a dot somewhere.
Yeah. Right. Okay, formal A. Okay. Then these are the symbols.
So
that
and I mean, let me, before we go on to that, let me just raise a question. So if I open a notebook that happens to have a formal A in it, does that count as it having been in the session?
I would think yes. I think at the drop of a formal hat, we should assume that A might be a formal A, but because most people will never see a formal A anywhere.
Okay, John, does that sound like a reason, like a doable thing?
Doable, yes. I mean, I assume that we're talking beyond 14.2 because we don't have enough time for the 14.2 features that we need to do, yet alone.
Right. Okay. We're talking about the future. Yes. Don't worry about which. We're trying to solve a collection of sort of some old chestnuts.
Okay.
We're trying to finally. I don't know what you do with old chestnuts. What do you do with old chestnuts? Do you eat them? Probably not. How do you dispatch old chestnuts?
I think it's a bad metaphor, given that I would consider throwing them out. So that's probably not the metaphor you want.
Okay, fine. The second thing is we're dealing with these variables, and when somebody says E equals 5.6, and then they get some message, my suggestion is why not ligature E, capital E, when you type an equal sign, just turn it into the exponential E, and people will immediately see it's wrong and know what happened. And then with the E, we would have an autocomplete that gives you the E variable, which has a slightly different visual appearance. That is something you can use as a thing that looks like capital E. Does that make any sense, John?
I'm just thinking about the I'm not
and then just to be clear, he's not saying that there's nothing special about equal sign. He's suggesting that the moment you have a token capital E and the cursor is not next to it, that it somehow turns itself into an exponential E.
Yeah, that's the interest. That's the part that I was going to raise is, yeah, the cursor not being next to it.
Okay,
Which
anyway, that this is just a thought. I mean, okay, but let's see what about the other variables. Go ahead.
I was going to say, while we're having thoughts along these lines, it's probably worth considering going the other way as well.
Which
If you
means
type lowercase e, that it offers to give you the e that is 2.7.
why not? Yeah, why not? That's a good idea.
Well, I can think of reasons why not.
What? That it's annoying when you type?
That it shows up in a standard quintic.
What do you mean?
Ax to the fifth plus bx to the fourth, etc., down to e.
Sure. So what?
The point being that there are cases where e gets used
Oh,
for.
yeah. We know. But I mean, my
Right.
point is, we're only suggesting, John, that there's an autocomplete that offers you the other e.
Right. So before we went to this ligature discussion, and we were saying, well, we need for these guys, we need to have a e and then an e variable or capital E variable to be consistent with our naming conventions.
Okay.
And which is somehow different from a normal e, which we haven't decided upon. And also that we should break the normal you must have two characters rule for these disputed characters, so that if you just type in a capital E, you get a pop-up, and then you can select between the E that's exponential E and the E that's a variable, and maybe another E or two just for good measure.
In
Right.
that list that you're showing, I'm not understanding K and N. Can you explain those to me?
These are things which are not in global context. N is like N of pi and so on.
Right.
See what I'm saying?
So okay, you're not suggesting that they are treated uniformly. You're just saying
No.
they're things we should talk about.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
And these are all candidates for having a capital foo variable character added, because these are system context symbols that may have properties that lead to badness if you try to use them in, say, solve. And obviously, most of them or all of them are protected, so you certainly can't assign to them.
Okay.
But bad things can happen if you do all, I've seen people use N in all kinds of places where it really, scares me. It's just going to blow up in their face somehow.
Yes.
Okay.
But so what would happen is we type E, you type a plus or something, and it ligatures into this E, and then the autocomplete for that E would contain an E variable, which would look like a capital E, more or less.
Would it contain anything except that?
We're not sure yet.
Well,
It
right.
might
I mean, I could
contain
see
script
including
names
like
and
the
things.
scripts and
Maybe, although we might want to
maybe.
just suggest to people they just use E variable.
I know.
Okay.
Letting them know that they have very, different appearances, I think is
Well,
probably
look, I think single characters, it could be the case that as soon as you've used a script character in that notebook, that it offers you script characters for either that single letter or all single letters.
right. But for E and exponential E, where they're very different looking, that's fine. But for N, right, they might want to choose something that's more different looking than whatever E variable
I know we
is.
haven't talked about N. We talked about E and I. Okay, I think we understand E and I and what we could do with those, because it's very clear we could ligature them into their sort of forms here, right? But these other ones, conceivably C and K. Don't C and K have display forms? I thought they did.
No, C of N has a display form.
I see. But we could conceivably ligature C and K, I think.
Perhaps. I mean, K doesn't have a display form.
But it probably should have. I think
Perhaps.
those could be ligatured as a way to just clarify them. That leaves, O is really not going to appear as a variable. I'm not so worried about that. I mean, it will be nice to do something there, but it's not really worrying. N
and D
are both worrying. Okay, so N.
Well, N seems different to me because it's the one thing here that doesn't have an analog, that even a remotely similar analog in traditional math, at least not as far as I know.
That's true.
Whereas D is a little strange, but at least you can kind of say there's an analog.
Yeah. I mean,
right.
D,
we could replace it with the partial symbol if we wanted to.
Could we?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we could or not, but
no, I don't think we can because that's this. That's
but there is a traditional math discussion to be had. At least it may not go anywhere.
I mean, this is what we would be replacing, but I think I agree.
But yeah, but I think the traditional form of D when it returns on the value, maybe that's D by dx and not partial D, but
no, or Y prime. But I think with
no, that's no, that is not D. That is derivative. Do hold of that. See?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. A comment about N. The fact is that N is a hack as a name. It would be better if it had been called numericalize, but it wouldn't have been better because we would have hated typing it all these years. Right? So having N do something a bit special, like become bold or something like that, would not horrify me. In other words, having an N, the representation of the N that is numericalize, when you see it in an expression, it's confusing to people because as John says, it's not a traditional notation. So having something happen slightly differently with it, I just don't think would be terrible. And it would avoid this confusion. And then we get to turn that N into the special N, and then we have the capital N variable as a separate thing. I should probably get going, but I think we made tremendous progress here. I mean, this has been a chestnut that's been rotting for years. And I really think this is important progress. I think this is going to actually be a pretty reasonable solution because, the experience we've had is, for example, in the, A space B. Wait a minute. That's not an example. Wait a minute. Where's an example? Where's an example where we get a times sign? Oh, maybe it's on the F space G. No, when do we get times signs? Why don't we get a times sign?
Is it only on output?
Oh, there.
Right. Because
see, that's great because it immediately tells me this. I mean, I've taken the hint from that 1,000 times that something was wrong, right? And I think this is a thing we've learned over the last 5 years, 10 years or something, is that those kinds of hintings make sense. And so, for example,
right. Although I will push back on this a little bit because, right, that is something where you would almost never intentionally type that. Whereas, N of pi is obviously something that you intentionally.
Sure. But the hinting, if the N turns, because we've got ligaturing these days that we didn't have in the past. And so, if the N darkens up slightly or something like that, it's no big deal. It's just like, okay, N's just do that. but it gives you the set. But if you thought of it as, oh, it's a variable, capital N, you'll realize it shouldn't, something's going wrong. I really
Yep.
like that approach.
Okay.
All right, I think we have a path here. Excellent. Well done, everybody. And I mean, the thing we haven't addressed is subscripted variables and making symbols out of subscripted variables, but let's not push our luck here.
Okay.
Um,
I can hold that as a reserved topic for a future LCC agenda.
right,
So we can
and let's
revisit
try and
that.
develop what we're talking about here in both LCC and user assistance, and see whether we can really crispen up a plan.
Okay. So you feel like we need another discussion in LCC about the six variables we just decided, or
I think we just need to go through the details. I think that's more of a user assistance thing.
okay, yeah. And I mean, I would be happy to join user assistance for if that would be helpful in.
I think yes. Okay, and I also want to have an LCC plus John, etc., and some user assistance folk about subscripted variables.
Oh, I'm always in LCC these days, so.
Okay. Yeah, we've just learned that you take things in a John direction sufficiently often that even if there's no specific John item, that just having him lurk in case he's needed is a good thing.
Yeah, there was some LCC meeting where you started making decisions about grid with not a single front end person present, and I was like, that's not going to happen again.
Okay, fair enough. Fine, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good. Travel well, John. Talk to you soon.
Thanks.